Welcome to Strata Originals. The purpose of this podcast is really simple. It's to showcase stories of originals, kind of leaders that we have a lot to learn from. And today we have Dave Maney. He's one of those folks we're going to learn a lot from today. Allow me to introduce him. Dave is the founder of an organization called the Expert Press. It's a venture-backed expert news data software and services company. That's going to need explanation. So we'll get to that. But what they help newsrooms deputize subject matter experts to contribute data-driven news commentary and analysis, which is really interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But his background, he's also a national economics and technology writer for Real Clear Markets. And I've seen him many times as a commentator on Fox Business News, Your World with Neil Cavuto. So he wanted to come on the Strata podcast because it's going to elevate his brand a little more than it does on Fox News. But before founding XP, he was in merchant banking. He was also in telecom, but he did a lot in publishing all before that. At the San Francisco Chronicle, he was the assistant to the president of the newspaper division. He was a business reporter for the Chronicle, the Bloomington Pentagraph, and the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. He also did work way back in his hometown of Binghamton, which is hard to say, Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin, where you did record and concert reviews. God, that's got to be something you've got to tell me about. But as a smart dude, he's also a graduate of the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. So that's very rarefied air, and the State University of New York. Now, check this out, everybody. 6 kids, 3 dogs, 2 sets of goalie equipment, and 1 remarkable life. Quite a story, Mr. Maney. Dave, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you for inviting me.
So I want to get to know you a little, get our guests to know you a little bit. You're an American. You live in Canada. Hockey is a huge part of your life for you and your family. But that passion started in the States. So tell me about how you became a hockey dude.
Yeah, you know what? Professional hockey started in my hometown in 1973. There was a local businessman who was from Parry Sound, and he was a very successful electrical contractor, and he had the idea of founding a team in a nascent hockey league called the North American Hockey League, which actually was the basis for the movie Slapshot, because which was the Johnstown Jets had a player whose sister was the screenwriter for the movie. And in fact, they shot the Binghamton Dusters star player was a guy named Rod Bloomfield, also from Parry Sound. And Rod Bloomfield was the body double, the skating double for Paul Newman in the movie. So the distance shots are of Rod Bloomfield, a temporary Binghamtonian. So that's where it got started. And I played actively what in Canada would be called rep hockey. In the US, they call it travel hockey. But played that and played, didn't go a lot farther than high school hockey, but kept playing, stopped for about 16 or 17 years. It got drawn back into it by a great Canadian friend. And then it kind of lit my entire world on fire.
Okay, so now we got to get the other side of the story. Your wife's also a goalie.
Yeah.
Tell me about your kids' names.
Our son's name is Deke, for the hockey, both for the hockey move and for my favorite football player when I was a kid, who was Deacon Jones. And our daughter's name is Dryden, who is obviously named after Ken Dryden, certainly the greatest intellectual goalie of all time, and a great Canadian. So, yeah.
So you should have been born Canadian. You know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm as good of a Canadian as you'll find in an American.
That's fantastic. Well, that's fantastic. Great story. Because we always see your family's always at the hockey rink, right? You spend a lot of your time at the hockey
always rink. Yeah. Our Dryden Deacon is an avid player, and Dryden's turning out to be a very skillful one. So just like apparently in our family, the boys are avid and the girls are good.
You're gonna have 3 goalies, and you couldn't have picked the more expensive way to go, right? 3 goalies family out of 4.
I'm stacking up my assets here behind me. When they retire, they go to my office.
That's so funny. That's cool. Excellent. Let's dive into some stuff. So I want to find, I kind of went over your bio a little bit, but I want to understand the journey of your career and any influences, any forks in the road that you had before you founded XP. So maybe just talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, the biggest influence on my work life was actually, I'm one of the few people who has a mentor that's basically my age. A classmate of mine, a fellow named Dave Dodson, was absolutely instrumental in my becoming an entrepreneur. His dad was an entrepreneur. He knew from the start that he wanted to do it, and he had already gone out and successfully acquired and built up and sold a company probably by the time we were 30. And then he was nothing but relentless encouragement to me to follow the same path, and including saying, I'll be your first investor. And, I think people who aren't entrepreneurs by nature, who haven't seen it in their families, need somebody, they need a Dave Dodson. And I wouldn't be who I am without him, frankly.
Wow. So tell me about the journey. So Dave helped push you there. What was the first thing you did that you worked with?
My first company was my pathway was that I was a very avid news guy from kind of a newsman. My older brother Kevin is a fairly prominent technology journalist, was USA Today's main technology columnist for I think almost 20 years, and has written probably 8 books, all kind of about the technology industry. And so he got me the job at the Binghamton Press, at my hometown newspaper, as a rock concert reviewer, because there was an erudite kind of cultured, arts editor who was in charge of the section, who hated rock concerts. And he's like, I'm not covering them. So, they got me, and it was fun. I got tickets to all the concerts. I got free albums to review. And, I did it for probably 2 years, built up kind of a little following. Funny story. While I was back visiting my mom in Binghamton, New York, in my hometown, I actually got a Facebook message with one of my clippings from like 1981 attached to it. And the guy was a guy I didn't know. And he said, I looked for you on here. He just said, this is it was a concert review where I had just eviscerated Iron Maiden. Where I just said, this is like the most horrible thing. This is like getting your head caught in a vice. And he just said, I just want to tell you, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. And so my reputation has hung around for 41 years, I guess.
Iron Maiden. Yeah, well, good prediction on their success there, Mr. Maney. Glad you're better at business than that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So talk to me about let's talk about the news industry and that kind of how the demise of that industry has kind of helped you in terms of what you're doing at XP Press. And I want to dive into a little more to that. So let's talk about the news industry model and what you've seen in the transition over the last, I guess, 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I wouldn't say it's in effect that it's helped us in the sense that it's not something we're rooting for. It is in fact just kind of an extraneous condition that we stepped in. I think the opportunity to help the news business is what created the opportunity for the Expert Press. So as I said, I mean, so I'd been a participant in the news business first in newspapers, then in television news. From the time I was in college, I worked at the NBC affiliate in my hometown throughout my college years at the State University of New York. And I had decided that was what I wanted to do when I got out of business school. And so I went to work for the San Francisco Chronicle and they owned the Chronicle and a couple of smaller city newspapers in a few other states, and loved it. Loved the people. The people in the newsroom are like the best people in the world. They're funny and they're irreverent and they're skeptical and they're no nonsense. They're great. And always have been, always in my experience. And I love that camaraderie and that action. And, what the internet did was eviscerate it. The peak year for newsroom employment in the United States, newspaper newsroom employment, was actually 2005. And the fall since then has been precipitous. The newsrooms have lost approximately 75% of their personnel, newspapers. And there's no sign of stopping. It's not going to stop. Local newspapers are dying under the pressure and under the cutbacks, and then the very nature of what a publication is changing. But that phenomenon of, hey, we don't have money to pay for skilled reporters, what I saw happening was that the most skilled. So when you cover a complex subject, right? Like if you're the guy covering finance or healthcare or technology or science or public policy, these big complex topics, the people who do it the best, not shockingly, are the most experienced. And the most experienced are generally the highest paid, and the best ones are the highest paid. And so when you get a hedge fund, as I think the largest single owner of newspapers in the US now is a hedge fund. And when the hedge fund comes in, they don't say, who's creating the great journalism here? I want to keep them. They say, who's the highest paid guy in the newsroom? You're gone. Maybe there's a buyout, maybe there's not. But they started, and this started now almost 20 years ago, of taking the highest paid people in the back and eliminating them. And you could see the coverage begin to degrade on those complex subjects. It's not that there's not still great journalism being done on those. It's that there's not as many journalists who are of that caliber doing it, because now only the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times can afford them, where before there was one in Chicago and one in Dallas and one at the LA Times. And those days are assuredly gone, where they had those deep experienced people who could provide context, who could provide a sense of history, who had dealt with like when you could see it in the reporting about COVID, where there were deep statistical questions and biases, and a reporter who had been covering public health for a long time would have understood those biases and been able to sort of pick them apart and say, whoa, wait a second. What you had instead was a bunch of 28-year-old journalists who had never seen anything about pandemic math or public health math, and they just went, oh man, this is awful. And so lacking that context, lacking that depth, lacking those math skills in some cases, really meant that the coverage became very reactive, not reactionary, reactive, very much more shallow, and you could not get this sense of history. You could not get this magnification of a complex point. Let me pull apart the way this works statistically, or the way that this, that this crypto instrument that's causing so much trouble works. I mean, you have that, you'd see it right now in this FTX story, the story of the bankrupt crypto exchange. Yeah. Go ask the average Canadian or American, like, tell me what FTX did and what went wrong. No idea. No idea. And it's because the world's becoming ever more complex, and we have stripped, we the collective economy, the world, technology has stripped those experienced resources out of newsrooms. And that was the opportunity that I saw, was that at the same time you had this, an economy that was powered increasingly by intellect and knowledge, right? It's a knowledge-driven world we live in. It's a skills-driven world, and so what you saw was that marketing was changing dramatically for people in knowledge-driven industries, right? There was always harder to market intangibles, but as the entire economy became sort of more and more virtual, less and less tangible, then marketing what was up here became like the critical thing, right? Like, and how do you do that? How do you put knowledge on display? How do you show capabilities? How do you differentiate who you are, or what you know, or what you can do for somebody, or your understanding of their problems, when all of that is ethereal? And in effect, that need on the part of marketers of high knowledge, highly skilled, deeply technically kind of competent people, in my opinion, matched up beautifully with this increasing sort of dearth of resources in newsrooms. And I just said, if I can take these people with these competencies and I can, in effect, help them get out of their heads what's critical and help sort of groom it journalistically for consumption, just showing what they know, not saying I'm wonderful, I'm great, just kind of just demonstrating what they know through helping people understand the complex stories of the day, became a match that I thought was very powerful and led to the creation of the founding of the company in 2013.
And so tell me about when you brought these ideas to the newspapers, publishers. How were they receptive at the beginning?
So the like all things, you kind of get a lucky break, and the lucky break I had was that, you know, an organization, Alan, where you and I met at the Young Presidents Organization, I had created YPO, knowing I was like a media guy, had asked me in 2010 to lead a project to create a partnership with a major international business news organization. That's what they handed me. Mm-hmm. Said, we want somebody who can kind of, you know, highlight the organization. We're going to start coming out of it's been a very quiet, non-public organization for most of its 50 years. And it started to say, we'd like to be seen a little bit more. And I worked for about 6 months and fashioned a partnership for them with CNBC. And the CNBC partnership led to CNBC covering some of them, broadcasting from some of their major events, and also created a program for contributors. And what happened was, what happened was that program struggled because it turns out there was a whole bunch of stuff that's needed to bridge the gap. and I couldn't get either side to fully embrace those fixes. And in effect, that's almost what the expert press does, which is kind of, you know, which is help an expert understand where they fit in and how their knowledge is relevant. How can, on a given day, how can you optimize the value of a contribution? How can you contribute in a way that the world needs most, that your audience needs most, right? Because if I just say, hey, you're a great expert on cryptocurrency, you know, show up and, you know, stand on the mark and deliver, that's a hard thing to do. Like, how do I know what the world's looking for? How do I know if the same thing I'm about to tell you wasn't just covered yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, unless I was somehow monitoring every sort of piece? So our job is to tell people where they're relevant, what form of content is needed, which publication needs it, and then help them get it out of their heads and deliver it, so that, because they're, you know, my true belief is that an expert with journalistic facilitation can create news content or news analysis content or commentary that is, it's world-class. Yeah. If it's done right. It's absolutely world-class, in the same way that, you know, if you want to know, we were talking about hockey before, if you want to know what it's like to stop a puck that's fired at you by, you know, Zdeno Chara at 105 miles an hour, a sports writer is going to have trouble explaining that. Yeah. A goalie, you know, you go get Henrik Lundqvist and ask him what it was like to have it happen. He could tell you really well. He might not be able to write it down, but if you gave him a little bit of help in sort of, you know, transcripting what was in his head, the piece you'd have would be rich and deep and like something you haven't seen before.
I love it. You know, it's so great to have jumped into an opportunity where there was a problem that both ends of the world need. The leaders need it, the journalists need it, and the consumers need it at the end of the day, the product that is delivered. Walk me through, you call it a platform and you call it data-driven. Can you walk me through the metrics for both sides, for both the content provider, which you are the catalyst for, and the newspapers or the publications? Walk me through that, please.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the good news is, as you just described it, it is incredibly, it's exciting and gratifying and economically, you know, very powerful to be standing at something where multiple sides have a problem, you know, multiple audiences, and it's the exact opposite of a zero-sum game, right? Like, it's a thing where everybody can benefit if you just kind of unclog the connections and facilitate those connections. That's the good news. The bad news is it's wildly complex. Because there are, there's a solid dozen factors, all of which are data driven, which affect that equation. So things like, what is the motivation of the expert? The expert needs a motivation because they've got, you can't ask people out of charity to kind of, keep doing this process. People need to show up for a reason, not to shill for themselves, but by sharing, they can kind of highlight what they're good at and let their audience know, hey, if it comes to cryptocurrency, like, I know a lot. So what they're trying to do, who they need to kind of have see it, and what sort of audience they want, what's going on in the news, because being relevant means, news is a change in somebody's environment that can either make them happier and make their life better or threaten their current situation. If it doesn't make your life better or threaten you, you as a reader don't care about it. And if it's not related to something changing, then it's not news. So when you put those things together, that means that as an expert, you want to be commenting on the things that are that dynamism. You want to be where the action is. And again, you as an expert, you might be aware of it, but you certainly aren't aware of the multiplicity of ways to think about it or cover it. So you have this giant multivariate optimization problem. And not only do you have that, but you have things which in many cases had no data taxonomy beneath them. So if I said to, it's like, I liken this to the thing about, the Inuit have 20 words for snow, where we just have snow, but they've got one for corns, this kind of snow and this temperature, and the fluffy stuff is this word, but all we have is snow. Yeah. It turns out that the exact same thing exists with expert commentary and expert analysis. There are, we've identified 20 different forms of expert content. And each of the 20 does something different for the expert and different for the reader and different from the publication. I'll give you an example. Coming out and giving your opinion about something, where you feel strongly about a political issue or something, doesn't do a lot for you as an expert. Probably makes enemies, makes, somebody disagrees with you, you're thinking, well, I don't want anything to do with them. And yet that kind of opinion or advice giving is the most frequent kind of thought leadership, or it's down here. On the other hand, if you're a wealth manager and you want to deal with crypto assets, and you have kept a proprietary deep set of data about, or you've done analysis on publicly available data about crypto companies that you think makes your point, and you use that objective data and show it, you are performing an entirely more credible and sort of richer service that's probably adding something original to the public dialogue on it. So those, there's a spectrum of forms of content, and they do very different things to sort of more and less benefit to the expert. And so when you take all of those things and then go kind of try to figure out what the demand is from the publication side, and know that the way that CNBC wants a story presented is different than the way that, this trade publication wants a story presented. And if you want to be there, you got to show up and kind of deliver it the way they want it. It becomes a very sort of complex data equation. And we are driving that data deeper and deeper into the provision of the service.
Interesting. And I'm going to come back to this, but you've kind of prompted a conversation around media bias. When you're talking to them, does that come up, positioning, right, left, especially in America? Is there any political realities that you have to give?
Look, I'll tell you this funny story. It was one of those kind of like, some of the dumbest things I've done as an entrepreneur. My COO and my head of the software program head came to me about a year ago and said, "Hey, there's an organization in the U.S. called Ad Fonts Media, FONTES, and they said that they do this media bias chart, and you may have seen it on social media. It's a thing that places all the publications on a spectrum of left, right, and how factual versus how opinion driven they are, and kind of the God particle on that chart is the Associated Press, which is the least biased and most fact-based according to their analysis. And my guys came to me and said, hey, we should have ad fonts do an audit. We talked to them. They're willing to do an audit of a random sample of our work because we think we want to see if it's got, bias. And I was like, why would we do that? Like, we're not in the political business. I just don't get it. And they're like, well, it's not going to cost that much. And come on, like, and by the way, they'll tell you, I was like a jerk about it. Like, guys, you're barking up the wrong tree. I don't get it. But I finally was like, they persisted. I finally like, okay, like, do it. It's not worth anything. When the thing came back, I realized what it was worth. So on that same spectrum where it's, fact-based opinion low and then left, right politically, our stuff, if the Associated Press is here, our stuff nestles in like right below it, almost completely apart from this left-right bias, and with more opinion than the Associated Press, but a lot less than than Mother Jones or or Alex Jones. And at first I was like, what's going on here? And then I thought about it. Business people, which makes up the bulk of our customers, they don't want to be seen as bomb throwers left or right. If they're showing up in the public square, they want to show up and deliver the facts. They want to talk about things as they know them. There's more opinion in it because analysis is a form of opinion, right? They're trying to make sense of something for you, but they're doing so in a fact-driven manner and adding context to facts without left, right. And when I saw that, I'm apologizing still a year later to my COO and the software head, but I actually think it is a wonderful addition to the media landscape because in a certain way, people are bringing their own integrity and their own brand to the table and sort of saying, look, if I'm here on the stage, I better play it straight. And I think that's a terrific phenomenon. It's one of the things I'm proudest of.
It's interesting too, because you think about it, it's actually validating your model, the independence, fact versus just opinion, and actually your fact and opinion together, which is really the highest form of journalism, right?
Yeah.
So that's got to be a value add for both sides going, look at us, where we fit. So great lesson learned, isn't it?
Yeah. And to your earlier question, that sensibility and sometimes that chart have really changed the dynamic for us with publishers, and so they increasingly are, and they're unfortunately their financial life's not getting any better, and so we found there's real where we had to work really hard in the early days to make the CNBC thing was I had a friendly to start it with.
Yeah.
But opening other doors, and our customers have been published in I think about 175 major publications and trade publications, but everything from the Wall Street Journal to Barron's down to dermatology, practice management today, and everything in between. And those were hard-won battles that now are now they've built into trusted supplier relationships.
And do you see this? I mean, I want to talk a little bit about social media, and social media can be argued democratizes the ability to have opinion. Are you democratizing a different way of journalism in the way that you think about it, or is it more linear?
I guess in a certain way, expert news lives in a layer between I can say whatever I want of social media or of your website. You can say whatever you want on your website unless you're regulated, and then you're bound only by that. Yeah. But there's no governor on what you say, and I think that's one of its challenges, right? I mean, the reason that Twitter is like a frigging killing field of hate and verbal battles is because people could say whatever they want and hide behind anonymity, right? Expert news is bylined. You got it. You own it. Don't say something you don't want to say. But know that this is an elevated platform that's got real power, and that in some ways, the journalistic brand that you're appearing on is at least vouching for the fact that you're not an idiot, that you're somebody who's has some expertise and some reputation. And I think that it's not a replacement for journalism.
Mhm.
It is something different. And it's something that that I think data and connectivity and workflow management makes possible.
Yeah.
That wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible. Then when I started in newsrooms with giant, clicky clacky terminals in 1981, you could not have had this sort of interplay, and nobody would have been looking for it. Now it's time is right.
What's really cool is that I go back to your goalie story, your goalie analogy. You're out there finding those goalies and those athletes who were on or are on the field, when journalism typically are, unless they came from the background, are typically journalists that have garnered expertise. So, you really are, there is a democratization of that. It's expertise that you're pulling out of corporate America and corporate Canada and corporate world, if you will, and showcasing that for the benefit of everybody. So it's actually I think people have played around the idea of that, but you've really honed in on a problem solution, which is really phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I don't know, Alan, if you've seen there still exists on the web a publication called the Players Tribune, which got started about the same time we did, and the Players Tribune is in effect expert news for athletes. Okay. Their challenge is, I think they actually had a business model that didn't work exactly right, because they sort of came off track and they fired their management team, and they've struggled a lot. But they're I think Derek Jeter was one of the co-founders, actually kind of put up some of the money for it and used his name on it in its early days. And some of the stuff that's on there is among the best sports, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't call it journalism. It's among the best sports content I've ever seen, and it is very much like our model of a journalistically assisted piece that's bylined by the athlete, and the insights that are brought to the table, are like nothing you've seen from anywhere else.
Well, you and I have, I'm sure, sat down with professional athletes over a beer and listened to the stories, and those aren't the stories that make it into mainstream media, and they're right, but some of
for good reason sometimes.
but what I'm really getting at is there's an underlying expertise and experience, right, that can't happen unless you're in the game. And using the sports analogy is really interesting because, when I was in IT security, I just should never forget it. I wasn't an expert in IT security, but I was presented as one. Yeah. Because I was the CEO. And so, but then I had to learn it to have the credibility and had the backing, and so that you present yourself as that expert. It's really, really an interesting thing. What I'm curious about now is I'd like to, if you have a story, and it could be customer side or supplier side, where they were skeptical as heck when you came to them. And then after a piece or a couple of pieces came out, they went, I see the light now. I appreciate it. I trusted you. And tell me about one or the other side. Is there a story that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I see that happen a lot, and what happens is, it's an interesting challenge. I've started 4 companies. One of them never quite got off the ground. Was a beautiful idea, but kind of too grand and too big to pull off. Took too much capital. Which fortunately I never got off the ground, or I would have lost people $1 billion probably. Ouch. The beauty of our thing here is, in this new category that we have of expert news, often it takes like an introduction of us to a CEO. Somebody says, these guys are doing something interesting. Dave's an interesting guy. His team's really interesting. Got a couple of Pulitzer Prize winning editors on his staff. You should talk to them. And so what we see often is, you come in and the comms department at the company's like, oh, I don't know what this is, and isn't this PR? And it's like, no, it's not PR, and they struggle to wrap their heads around it, and then almost sometimes, frequently, out of a sense of either that CEO thing of I'll make a bet on this or I'll take a flyer on this, where they'll come and sign up and say, all right, let's give it a try. And we've seen our biggest customers, who are a couple of financial services firms, a couple of major online, higher education becomes a very important segment for us. So a couple of major online degree granting, institutions are our big customers. We've seen those big customers grow. So you get the flyer from the CEO, and then it's like, hey, oh, wait, and then suddenly, in some cases, we've had, and this is a good problem for us, where partners at professional services firms are battling a little bit, saying, I want one of those. I want a voice for what I do. So yeah, it's but I'll tell you, pioneering something really different is like the hardest. The act of creation is really, or realization of a creation is like the hardest thing I've ever done.
Well, then the validation becomes what you've done, but you hadn't done it before, so it's hard to. It's kind of So, tell me a little bit more in our last segment on. You talked about colleges and universities. What are they using it for? How are they leveraging your platform for their?
So higher education is kind of, in some ways, our most interesting segment, because they come. It matters still how much kind of native credibility you have when you show up at the newsroom, right? So somebody, it'd be a bigger challenge to have a used car dealer as an expert commentator than it would be to have a university president. When you think about expert news, I mean, where is there a larger repository of expertise and knowledge than at a university? So they come with credentials that give them natural authority. And then again, there's just this this roadmap of insight across the university. So they're doing everything from applicant recruitment, which is, hey, we want to showcase some of the knowledge and power and understanding of the landscape of higher education and why it's important, and how to optimize your career choices and all those, how to get value for your money. They want to be seen as that. They want to be seen as consumer friendly to drive applications. They want to be seen as knowledgeable about the environment and in control, I think in part to appeal to parents, to sort of say, hey, your most important thing, your kid is safe with us. We'll help launch them correctly into the world. They use it for faculty recruitment to sort of say, hey, interesting stuff's going on here, and we want to bring the best faculty in. They use it for alumni development to say, we want to highlight for our own alumni what great stuff is happening at the school, because we want them to give, we want them to be bigger donors. So there's a lot, that's an interesting world that I've only become familiar with over the past few years at this level. And they got a lot going on.
It's interesting. So you're discovering verticals as you go along.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
We're actually in Strata Originals, we're finding the same kind of thing on our personal branding. Is we're saying, oh, professionals need this more, or people who have kind of sold their business and are looking for what's next. And it's a discovery process as you talk to people and go, that's really cool. So it's really interesting that we're paralleling those kind of discoveries as we move forward. That's really cool. Interesting. I have one last question for you, my friend. This has been awesome. And we've talked about the past and we've talked about the future. So if you had a time machine, would you want to go back or would you want to go forward?
Yeah, I would go back to about 1970. I'd go back to 1971, start playing hockey a few years earlier, and, change the direction. I'd have the kind of career you had. But certainly more than I went for. It's like a lot of guys, like a lot of, I obviously still play, and the very highlight of my week, playing, and you always kind of wonder what if. It's Alan, it's funny, the dreams and aspirations that I kind of left on the ice by never kind of taking the right path or making the right choices. I'm fortunate that I'll never say that about my business career. Like, I did take the risks, and I did do the work, and I did kind of, go where I most aspired to be. And while I may wish I had done it on the ice, I'm thrilled that I did it in real life.
That's a beautiful way to end this, Dave. Thank you so much. This was a great learning, and for me, and I know for our audience, and I really appreciate you taking the time that you spent with us.
Well, thanks, Alan. It was a lot of fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, the captain